Hello, welcome to the Motivational Millennial Podcast. I'm Blake Brandis.
And I'm Ivy LeClaire.
Our conversation today is inspired by our interview with Tiny Leaps, Big Changes creator Gregg Clunis. And today we're going to be talking about loving your true self. Ivy, what inspired you from our conversation with Gregg?
I really appreciated the story that Gregg shared about when he was in high school. Sort of the shy version of himself was not how he really saw himself and not who he wanted to be out in the world. So he started pushing himself by doing performing and basically being adept at being an extrovert, even though he's still an introvert in reality, and how he talked about how he feels like he's crafted this sort of performance version of himself that in a way is a type of protection, because if the performance version of himself is judged or ridiculed or people are talking about that he can just say, oh, well, that's that version of me. That's not the actual me, and sort of let it go. So one of the things that he's been practicing is bringing more of his true self, his like silly self, fun self, whatever it is, that he basically from just being at home to out in the real world. And so sort of consolidating this performance self with what he is considering his true self. I think this is such a really interesting concept because I think in reality, we're all performing. I mean, as he was saying that, I just thought to myself, like, who here does not have a performance self, right?
Sure.
I mean, even if we are someone who is putting themselves out there, going on stage, acting, public speaking, all of that, we can have all of our actions lining up to be this type of person, but in our mind, we're still not that type of person. And I think it's so interesting because, I mean, in a way, aren't our actions what make us that type of person? It's kind of both and, I feel like. So on one end, if you want to be, like, for example, I remember when I started doing yoga, my whole life, I didn't really consider myself very athletic. I would not have described myself as athletic growing up as a kid. I didn't play sports. I played a musical instrument and was kind of nerdy. I mean, I loved rollerblading. It was the 90s. But I didn't get into exercising really until college. And I remember thinking, I'm not the kind of person that does yoga. Like, that isn't me. I am not an athletic person. I'm not the type of person that does yoga. But in reality, I became the type of person who does yoga when I just started going to yoga classes and like took those actions. I took those actions, I started attending yoga classes, and even in my head, if I said I'm not the type of person that does yoga, that wouldn't be true because I'm going to yoga classes. Then at that point, it's how am I viewing myself? So that tool can be really helpful because over time, you start to shift the way you view yourself. In that example, over time, I kept going to yoga classes. And then eventually the way I view myself shifted to be, I love yoga. I'm a person who goes to yoga classes, right? So sometimes we have to make external changes and take actions that don't feel like ourselves so that we can reach that vision. It's like that tiny leaps. You're taking tiny leaps toward being someone who goes to yoga classes, and being a yoga person by just signing up and going. So in that way, sort of performing in a way or acting in a way that feels different than how we view ourselves can be very beneficial in helping us to grow in a direction that we aren't currently. It helps us get out of our box that we have put ourselves in.
Sure. It's like, imagine you're a hermit crab and you've grown as big as your shell can contain, and you might tell yourself, well, that's as big as I'll ever get. This is what my life is. This is the only options available for me. It takes actually leaving the shell and the security and the safety of the shell and finding a bigger shell to see what's actually possible. Because if you just spent your entire life inside that shell, you would only know that experience. I think that's the only thing possible for you.
Right. You have elected to put yourself in that box. And so what I'm saying is, what's the difference between like having imposter syndrome and not allowing yourself to see yourself as successful or see yourself as an outgoing person or see yourself as a yoga person because you won't let go of the identity that you've created for yourself.
Sure.
So you have that imposter syndrome versus you are creating a facade that is in actuality nothing like what you want to be like. And you are putting yourself in a box through your external actions versus your internal. It feels like this construct could be both empowering and disempowering, creating a performance version of yourself, if that makes sense.
Well, it's art. It's always the debate. And, for a long time, I think people thought that most art, well, this is not, okay, I can't say for a long time because we go back to the Greeks, we start getting very different opinions. But there's always been this debate in art, let me just frame it that way, that, is the singer singing about their own lives? Do they believe what they're singing, or are they just a performer? And I think this particularly became relevant in rap music when you had rappers talking about, oh, they shot people, they sold drugs, and the government's like, okay, well, if we arrest you and you have a gun, we're going to use your rap lyrics in which you say you shoot people as evidence of your moral character. And so there was been a huge debate about whether things rappers say in their rap lyrics actually indicate who they are.
Wow. Yeah.
I think it's important to be able to make that distinction. And I don't think it's necessarily inauthentic. I have performed songs as DJ Decryption that I wouldn't perform as Blake Brandis. I have a few other aliases from back in the day that I will not disclose on a podcast. Were pseudonyms for very, important reasons. But there's something, on the other hand, very liberating about having a performative space where you can explore and say things that you don't necessarily believe, that you wouldn't think to yourself, but it gives you a sense of the range. I think so often your point about the box is really well taken, because often we live in this super constrained set of possibilities for us. And even thinking about going to yoga is such a stretch away from who we are. But all it takes is you physically walking out the door,
right,
like you would walk out the door to go to the grocery store. It's just, instead of going to the grocery store, you go next door to the yoga studio. And instead of paying $10 for whatever you buy at the grocery store, you pay $10 for a yoga session if you're an affordable yoga place, apparently.
Right.
So I'll say that must be a special they're having. So the physical actions are not different at all from the things that you do on a daily basis, but it's the story makes you never walk in. It's like, for me, the idea of getting a manicure or a pedicure is so foreign to me. I would never even consider the possibility of just going and walking into, like, I guess, a nail salon. Is that where those things happen?
Indeed.
Yeah. But for some people, it's a regular thing they do. And so there's nothing that prohibits me from doing that. It's just the story I have that's not in my range of potential things I might do on a Friday afternoon.
And my point is, too, that the types of songs that you might perform as DJ Decryption or your other unnamed aliases, I would argue are parts of you, right? Like that. Sure. They aren't not you at all, like completely fabricated performances. They might be sort of conscious of the audience they're speaking to, you know what I mean? But they're still part of you. So I think, when I think about my own personal experience of realizing that I have been telling myself that I'm shy. I mean, this is literally like last year, I had this realization and it didn't come on my own. Like I had other people reflecting to me like, Ivy, I don't see you as shy, but I've been telling myself I'm shy. I'm so shy. I'm shy. I can't speak in front of people. But when I stand up and speak in front of people, I'm very articulate. I do an incredibly great job. I'm bold. I speak my mind. I share my opinions. So in reality, I'm not actually shy. But in my mind, I was telling myself the story that I'm shy and I'm faking being bold.
Mm-hmm.
That was the story I had my whole life. Like I'm a shy, timid person. And all the times that I'm extroverted or that I put myself out there or that I speak in front of hundreds of people, like that's a fluke.
And that's the power of language, because language determines what things mean to us, right? Like the label of shy creates your interpretation of your experience.
I mean, even going beyond that, my point is that what if, in a way, Gregg is both introverted and has the ability to be extroverted and speak it. Like, what if it's not either or? You know what I'm saying? And it's just like with me, it's like I was choosing to see myself as shy because I had myself in a box of shy and what shy means and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than in reality, what my actions were was boldness and bravery and putting myself out there. All I had to do was just stop thinking of myself as shy and see the reality of my actions, and I think this speaks in large part to one of the topics, which is about self-awareness.
Yeah, a great transition, because Greg made this point in his advice that he would give after all of these years of researching personal development, leading this community, seeing the challenges that people have. And he said one of the biggest challenges people have is assessing an accurate self-image of themselves. And we either tend to overestimate our capabilities or underestimate our capabilities in certain ways, or not recognize the kind of limitations we're putting on what's possible for ourselves. And Greg was really helpful in saying that a good thing or a bad thing, there's no value judgment attached to these things. Because when there's a value judgment, that leads to the shame, and that's what stops us from changing. Because we say, I am bad at this, or I am this characteristic I don't like. But if you just say, I act in these ways, and this is the effect those actions have on other people or on my life, you can change the way you act. It might be hard if you've got some deep-seated habits, but it feels almost impossible sometimes to change the way you are. Ironically, the way you are, quote unquote, is just a story. So it actually happens to be one of the easiest things to change once you're aware of it. Like you said, once you got the reflection back, shy is a story that no longer fits you. You can still acknowledge some of the behaviors that you might have labeled as shy and look at the ways those maybe help you or don't. But you don't have to adhere to this label and then say, well, the only thing I can ever do is what shy people do, or not do things that shy people wouldn't do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think also in that case, the reality was is that I wasn't acting shy. Most of the time I
Right.
wasn't acting shy. So I needed to be honestly aware of what my actions were truly reflecting, and then accept that I am bold, not shy. But I had this identity of being shy. It's like when we have such a hard time where we think that people don't like us or something.
Sure.
And people are like, no, I really like you. I like spending time with you. I want to hang out with you. And your brain is like, no, I don't think that's true, because you've put yourself in a box of I'm shy, or I'm not likable, or I am, whatever these things. So I think there's the reality too of one side of that is looking at some of the actions that you have taken and how maybe some of them are harmful or destructive or not in service of what you're really trying to create for yourself, and accepting that in a loving way so that you can then shift some of those actions. But I think the other side is being honest about how you have taken actions that are in service of what you're trying to do or what you're trying to create, and just accepting that in this area you don't have to beat yourself up about it anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it's really, sometimes we're just refusing to see ourselves in an accurate way, that all we have to do is shift the way we see ourselves and our actions. I mean, I'm not saying all we have to do. It's simple, not easy. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So.
And how many of those labels did you inherit from your childhood? Did I inherit from my childhood?
Yeah.
How many stories we started to tell ourselves, or people told about us in elementary school, middle school, high school, maybe even college, do we adopt and say, yes, that's true. That's who I am. It's one of the reasons in my talks to high school students for a number of years, my main message was on the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of, because that story determines the actions you take. And it's worth sitting down and looking at that story, because so often we spend all our time focused on the actions. Oh, I just need to be more productive. Oh, I just need to work out more. Oh, I just need to eat healthier. It feels more productive to spend time focusing on the actions. But what if we took a step back and focused on the story first, spend some time really understanding it from a place of love, not a place of judgment, and just saying, this is what I believe. This is why I believe this. Because the reality is your brain is trying to protect you. Your brain is trying to keep you safe. So these stories that may not be serving you, they're not bad stories. They're outdated attempts to keep you safe. And it could look like any number of things. You know what? If you go out on a limb and do karaoke in front of people, you're going to be embarrassed. People aren't going to like you anymore, and you're not going to have any more friends. So that story in your brain is saying, hey, don't do karaoke. We want you to have friends. We want you to be happy. It's saying if you eat these other foods that may be healthier theoretically, you're not going to be happy because it's not going to be the foods that make us feel good and comfortable and safe and loved and like we can relax. So if you start eating those other foods, you're going to be unhappy. I want to keep you safe. I want to keep you happy. That's why we hang on to the story. So I think spending some time lovingly looking at the story is actually one of the most productive things we can do if we want to start making tiny leaps to big changes.
Yeah, and when we talk about the theme of loving your true self, it's like, how do we look at ways in which we've put ourselves in boxes that keep us small? Like we just accept sort of our tiny current hermit shell crab. Wait, hermit crab shell? What?
Hermits in a half shell. Hermit power.
Hermit power.
Nowabunga.
Did you say?
I said nowabunga, like the power of now, like a hermit would meditate.
Oh my god.
Nowabunga.
That's probably what Splinter was always saying, like after they left, like he was meditating. Because he was always like the Zen one, right? Was his name Splinter? Is that correct?
Master Splinter. Great memory.
It's been so long. Anyway.
Maybe Krang was the ego. Anyway, not to turn Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles into a Buddhist metaphor.
But, when we're looking, going back to the theme at hand here, in loving your true self, not only do we need to be aware of the boxes we've put ourselves in, how we're keeping ourselves small, or on the flip side, not being aware of the behaviors that we have that may be, self-destructive or self-sabotaging, we have to look at those things non-judgmentally. It's like, oh my God, like I could have said to myself, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't realize that I wasn't shy until I was 30 years old, like that's so, right. What's wrong with me? It was just like, whoa, it was sort of like waking up from the Matrix and looking back at my life through the lens of me being bold. I was like, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense, so having that non-judgment allows you to accept it and move forward from that place, whether it be, needing to grow in a constructive way or whether just accepting that you are awesome in whatever way that is. And also, if you really are putting on a facade that is totally not you, totally not in alignment with who you are and what you want, like truly, then how can you love the true version of you that actually really, for some reason, I'm thinking about, I think this may have been a different after show that we were talking about it, but like you were talking about getting your PhD, you know what I mean? Like you struggled there for a period of time when you were getting your PhD because of the structure and just a lot of stuff that was going on right then. What if when you really sat down and looked at it, you were like, I really don't want to get a PhD. Why am I doing this? I mean, for you, that wasn't the case, but for some people it might be. So looking at that part of yourself and saying, is it okay that this isn't really what I wanted, that I'm just performing these actions because I feel like it's expected of me? And how to really love that part of yourself too, so that you can bring more of that into the real world and really be honoring yourself.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I think it helps to have a coach or a therapist or both, because sometimes having a space where you can process these things with people who are just there to support you and who can reflect back what they're hearing, what they're seeing, that's so powerful. Because we try to do it with friends, I think, but friends and family, they really care about us, hopefully, and they love us, but they are invested often in stories of people we have been. And that's fine, but that might not be who we are now. And we need a space where we can explore changing those things in a way that's safe. So I appreciate everything you're doing with Thrive Beyond Anxiety to help people find that space where they can embrace and be aware of the ways that they are feeling anxiety and how it's affecting their lives, and things that they can do to make some adjustments, and that anxiety doesn't have to define who they are. So I really appreciate the work you're doing and the space you're providing for people in that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that acknowledgement a lot. I think it's so true that it can be so valuable to get a community or, a coach or somebody who can be a partner with you in exploring, how do I really feel about life and myself? And, if you've got a great coach or a great therapist, they're going to be treating you with compassion and support.
Yeah.
And also holding you as strong at the same time, which is super important, because that's what we want to do for ourselves, right? Treat ourselves with compassion and support, and also hold ourselves as strong.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a great conversation, Blake. Thank you.
It has been. Thank you. And thank you to our awesome listeners. We hold you as strong and whole and empowered. And we hope that you can have some loving self-awareness in your life over the coming week. And we look forward to catching you next week on the Motivational Millennial Podcast.
Bye. For show notes and previous episodes, or to learn more about our coaching and event offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. That's millennial, MILLENNIAL. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
Our theme music was composed and performed by our very own Blake Brandis.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Brittany Felix. Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!